All right, another week and another episode Digging Deeper, and we have a newbie. Pete and I are here, but
I'm not new. I've been here a few times.
I know you've been here a lot, okay. but the newbie is none other than Jen Peterson. Welcome to Digging Deeper.
Thanks. I'm so excited that you called me in for the first time about this topic in particular.
Oh, well,
curious as to how I made that list, but
I just thought, like, you know, who's closer to that age?
Wow. Jeez.
Just
I'm
breaking
only
in 30. Here on Digging Deeper. Are you?
No.
Me too. So is Pete.
Not at all.
No, we're excited to have you here. So maybe just introduce yourself. What do you do here at Rise City Church? And then we'll jump into talking about message and stuff yesterday. But like,
sure.
Yeah.
I'm Jen Peterson. At Rise City Church, I get to work with the middle and high school ministry. I have a long history of kids pastoring. So this was something that was kind of out of my realm, but like so passionate about it and so excited and actually really honored to be a part of what God is doing here because he's doing a lot with our middle and high school program. So it's an incredible blessing to be a part of it. So,
yeah. And you've been a part of Rise City for how many years? It's been a while.
Probably like 6 years, I think.
Yeah. 6 years. And you're starting your second year on staff.
Yeah.
Right?
1 year completed.
Yeah.
So just over a year I've been on staff. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's it like trying to keep Anthony Hall in check? Because that's really what we hired you for. It's like, man, that guy.
You would think that is true. And like, there are some bits of that, but honestly, like Anthony and I are we have an incredible rapport as far as like working as a team.
Yeah. We
really play to each other's strengths. And I don't know, have a great communication. So yeah, it's been really fun working with Anthony. We are most always on the same page, so that makes it easy.
Always. Where are you not? Throw
him under the bus.
Yeah, come on now.
That's a confidentiality clause.
Okay.
Where does Anthony suck the most? We want to know.
He's not. He's so incredibly intentional with our students, and like I have 2 of those in the program.
Yeah.
Actually 3. I have a middle schooler too, so it's really cool to see how his gifts come alive with the kids. So yeah.
What's been the biggest shift for you moving from your history of kids under 5th and under to now the teen years as an employee and being involved in the ministry?
That's a great question. I think like it's been natural because I've been raising kids through the process. So my kids are now that stage. So I get to be really in tune with like culturally what's happening with them. And, I think the biggest difference is it comes from teaching like who God is, which we're still doing with middle and high school, but there's a lot more mentoring that happens. Like how do we walk in real life faith through the daggers and the attacks that are coming at our middle and high schoolers? So a little bit more meat to what we're doing. And I think when I was a kids pastor, I did a lot of parent mentoring and now I'm doing a lot more student mentoring, if that makes sense.
What's your favorite part?
Of what? Being a part of this?
This job, doing it. Youth ministry?
I really think it's watching these kids' faith become their own and come alive to them, which has been happening like at a rapid pace, more rapid than I even imagined. So watching them really take hold of things and like not through perfection, but just through earnest seeking of Jesus and watching how God is breaking down walls and like they're seeing who Jesus is real to them and how they can make an impact in the community around them. That has been the most exciting part, I think.
Cool.
How do your kids feel having mom in middle school and high school ministry?
You'd have to ask them. I thought that I try to take a back seat. Like when we went to camp, only my son Joaquin went, and I really just tried to stay out of what was happening with him and get out of mom mode.
Yeah.
But I do think like most of the middle and high schoolers see me more as a mom mode. They see me more as that nurturer and caretaker and like setting up an environment for them. My high school girls probably see me more like a mentor, but still that mom mode, which I'm okay with. I actually am quite pleased with how much they're willing to share and be open, and they still think I'm fun and cool, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Joaquin got baptized, right?
Joaquin got baptized.
Which was awesome. So
yeah, that was incredible to be a fly on the wall, to see like, you know, it wasn't me giving him his faith. It was like him walking through it and really coming alive. And he has a lot of stuff that he needed to bring to Jesus, and he did that, and I got to see it, but like as a bird's eye view and watch him really just like minister to others and have an experience with Jesus that was really real. That was incredible. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, Pete and I both have kids in the middle school ministry, and
More to come.
Yeah. What'd you say?
More to come.
More to come. Yeah.
Not more kids coming, they're just growing.
Yeah. A lot of grants and goodness.
Is this an announcement?
More
Pete?
children
Is this an announcement?
No, the next announcement would be the K for boys, hopefully by next week, making their entrance in the world. But no, just having kids in that ministry, seeing how much they enjoy it, they're thriving, and I just want to say thank you. We're excited that not only you're on the podcast, but more than anything, that you are on this team, and you bring so much to the table. So,
Thanks.
So great to have you on.
Super fun.
All right.
Yeah.
So, what we're
here
today?
to talk about death.
It's so fun.
Yeah, I was just kidding. By the way, I didn't invite you because
It was actually intentional to offset. Like, well, Jen's very bubbly, upbeat personality. Let's bring her on so this doesn't.
I just needed you to protect me from Pete, because if Pete went down that rabbit hole, man, I was like,
death.
oh gosh, it's just dark.
I think about it every day.
Wow.
It was a very unique message too, in the sense that you, from the beginning, you said it was almost more like your own devotional.
Yeah.
Going through it. Like, what was that process? We've talked in the past on a podcast like this about the behind the scenes, writing messages, things like this, but this was a very different thing. What was your process like, taking a personal devotion and turning it into a Sunday morning sermon?
It actually was way easier. Like, I found it to be far less stressful. Just because it's interesting, because like, even, I prepare devotionals for staff almost every time we meet.
Yeah.
And I put time and effort into it, but it feels like the actual delivery of it is just like, it's just a different setting, because it's like, you staff, there's like, 12 or 14 of us in a room, more conversational, just feels like, I don't know, less apt to feel like you need to perform. And so stepping into doing something that was already kind of this devotional that I'd been through, I kind of took that mindset. And that's why I decided to even sit on the stool versus stand up, because I just wanted to kind of feel like that. And I don't know, you kind of hope that if it meant something to you, that it might mean something to somebody else. And so I said, let's just try to replicate that experience. And I like experimenting with different types of preaching, whether it be going through devotional, or I think last year I did the first person narrative through the prodigal son. And I don't know, sometimes it also I just like to try different things, but yeah.
You made a comment in the hallway afterwards. You weren't talking to me, I overheard you, that surprised me a little bit, because you kind of said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this was the first time in 6 years that you actually didn't fully remember that it was the anniversary of your father's passing.
Oh, my dad dying. Yeah.
I thought you planned the whole message because of that. Was that just a coincidence?
It was coincidental.
Okay.
Yeah. Earlier in the week, when I was preparing, I definitely knew I wanted to use that picture. I'd sent it to Ben already, of kind of my dad's visitation. And I had it in my notes, September 28th, 2017. It just didn't register to me that it was like that time of year.
Yeah.
Like, and so, even on September 23rd, which is the 6 year of my dad passing, I said something to Jamie. I was like, what is today's date? And she's like, it's September 23rd. I was like, it's no one's birthday or anything like that. I was like, I literally just, our whole family, like my kids yesterday after church were like, why'd you not say anything about Papaw? And I was like, guys, it was just weird. Like, it just didn't hit me. I think there's a little bit of it because I don't do good sometimes with dates on calendars and know what's coming. A part of me being off social media is I didn't have my sister to remind me of things, because she always will post in advance, like stuff. But yeah, I got here Sunday morning and I was like, holy cow, like that was yesterday. Yeah, yesterday was the actual date. So
It's an interesting thing about grief. Like, in the beginning, I feel like there's a lot of remembering of every little specific detail. And then it just kind of slowly becomes just a part of you. So you just like adopt the living and the differences. And it's not necessarily about the date so much as it is about the remembering of all the things.
Yeah.
So it was already a part of you. You already had the picture. You were already remembering, but the date wasn't like something that stuck out. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Jen, have you lost someone close to you? I mean, what?
Yeah. So no, I mean, this topic is interesting, but I do have a lot of things to say about it. What you said resonated with me a ton. I've lost a number of people in my life, but most recently, my brother-in-law, just a couple of years ago, passed unexpectedly and really tragically. And it for sure changed all of us in the family. It definitely made us focus in on what was important and what was necessary to let go of and what was necessary to hold on to. And it really does. It just shapes and shifts everything in your life, for the good, bad, or the ugly. But it does a huge shifting for you. And you just really start to think through, like, man, what am I living for? And what is important and what isn't? And you just start to like really reprioritize everything that you do.
Yeah.
So we did a huge change about like where our focus was, where our time was being went to. For the first definitely year, a lot of our time and attention went to supporting my sister and her family and all of that kind of stuff. But it still has remained like, your people and making sure that you're loving well and, your words and your time and your effort are used in the best way, I guess.
I remember that because that was like during COVID and all the different rules and all the other stuff. And I remember you guys, even Todd, coming in here and just seeing just the shock of how sudden it was, but also then having to deal with all the different protocol stuff that was in place and everything. Like, I just remember seeing like you guys. That was a really.
It was a high trauma time for sure. Yeah.
Time.
Yeah.
Wow. Have you, Pete?
To be honest, no.
Yeah.
No. I I'm be 45 next month, and I mean, all of my grandparents have passed, but I wasn't close to any of them. No, I haven't. I've been pretty shielded from that in many ways. So hearing it from others is helpful, getting perspectives and things. So I feel very grateful that I haven't yet, but I mean, like you said, death is undefeated. So it will inevitably be part of everyone's story. So yeah, it was heavy. I thought I didn't actually feel heavy though in the service. You know what I mean? Like, it was a heavy topic, but it felt more almost like somewhat inspiring, I guess I would say. It didn't feel like, oh, we're all going to die, as much as like, what does this mean for living?
Yeah.
On Saturday, I was having breakfast with my in-laws, and I heard this story. I haven't confirmed it's true, but I'll trust it. Apparently,
that's always a good way to introduce them. Yeah.
Dan told me that there is a grave in El Cajon or near here where somebody buried their Corvette with them.
Oh my goodness.
And I literally they buried a Corvette. And when I heard it, I just thought, that is the saddest, truest American thing right there,
wow.
isn't it? Like
not a Matchbox, like an actual car.
Loved his Corvette.
You're from around here. Did you heard that?
No. I'm not from around here, actually. I'm from, I guess I'm not from East County, but
but you're
ish.
in this area.
No, I've never heard that.
Okay.
That's wild.
But it was funny because when you were talking yesterday, that was playing in the back of my head about how, it's a common refrain, you can't take it with you, but like how people, here I'm imagining, I don't know, here's a guy who probably spent so much of his adult life just loving a car, and there was nothing else, I need to bury this car with me because it was the only thing, but now it's gone,
Yeah.
And it led to an interesting conversation that we had about, this was completely random, but it was the day before, even just about the difference between in the Midwest versus out here in the West Coast. There aren't really any graveyards, nearly to the same
there's
extent.
not near as many cemeteries. Yeah.
Most
see
people
them.
choose
They're
like
hidden.
cremation, whereas in the Midwest, it's very like everyone's buried. And it's like even the idea of being buried and having a
interesting.
gravestone of like needing to be remembered or having, and it's like all of it is so fleeting. Like, what are you actually living for, and I don't know. It's just interesting that we had that conversation, and seeing where you went yesterday, it was just a very thoughtful morning, I think, for a lot of people.
I got the opportunity to grab a couple of our high school girls that usually walk to and from church. And so I gave them a ride home, and we were talking about the message, and I was asking them, what their thoughts were. And I
These
was
are
like,
girls that were sitting with my wife?
yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so I just was like, what would you change? Like, what would you change if you knew your time was coming? And One of them said that they would be kinder, and the other one said that she thought about it for a second, but then she said, like, I would listen more. I would just listen more. And so I guess my question to you is, how did losing your dad, you said it affected you and you changed the way you lived, but like what specifically was it that you changed?
I think that I changed the pace that I was living by. And I intentionally pulled back in kind of the ministry world of pursuing some, kind of side hustle opportunities, so to speak, whether it be speaking other places or working with the church plant organization. There were things I just felt like they were going to even bring me to travel more. And that was something I just said, not right now. If God opens up the door down the road, I like those things. It'd be fun, but right now I want to be home more. So that was one thing. It eventually led me to move from Santee to Alpine. Because part of that was the pandemic, and Jamie and I read Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And so there was a combination of that, but there was already a seed planted with my dad's funeral of just like kind of living in a smaller, slower paced area. And for us in Santee, like, it's 55, 60,000 people. My hometown was 7,000 or 8,000 people, and no such thing as traffic there. And Santee has a decent amount. So it really led us to look to what's the closest like to that. And then Alpine was like, it's 15, 16,000, not near as much traffic. So it shifted us to move out there. And it was something that actually I know it wasn't homeschooled growing up, but I just have a memory of my mom was highly involved in my education. Partly because she was a trained school teacher. But when we started talking about homeschooling, I thought about what my mom and dad's presence was in my education and thought that'd be really good for my kids with Jamie. Yeah. And so those are probably three things that were pretty distinct that caused me to change pace.
Those are huge. Yeah.
So
when you were talking yesterday, and it ties into what you were just saying, I had an interesting like dialogue going in my brain, because what you were presenting, and I think for those of you that weren't there, you were kind of following the devotional that they gave you.
Yeah.
There really were I felt like there comes a moment when you talk about, remembering death, carpe diem, all these kind of things, that when you come to that place, it kind of forks in the road, because where you shared how it affected you, I know many other people who went the exact opposite direction and said, I got to do more evangelism. I haven't written a book yet. I gotta do something. I sit around with my family all day. I got to accomplish something. I'm almost dead. I've not to that extreme, but I've heard that sentiment. Like, I've only got this much time left. God has more stuff for me to do. I got to travel more. And I was talking to actually a mutual friend of ours, Cedric Williams, who both of us spent 2023 in the process of writing and things. And I asked him, because he's a little bit younger, about our age. And
he's probably, I think, 39.
And he threw it out to me. He's like, I've only got about 4 more books in me before I die, so I got to get them done. And it's like that. There's that kind of like perspective of like facing death and being like, I got stuff to do. But for your perspective, it was more like, I need to be a better father for whatever time I have left. And it's interesting. Like, I don't know where necessarily a question lies, but I just found that tension interesting, like what to do with it. What if facing death actually pushes you to be more busy and more hectic?
Well, I think that's why that last kind of exercise, that quote from St. Francis, where he talks about, I've done what's mine. He's like, what's yours? That's not universal like that. Like for somebody like Cedric, for example, or some people that might be like, hey, I've got to get these books out. Or I think our father-in-law would be like that. Like he's going to keep going till he breathes his last breath doing ministry. I think that that's wired in them. And that's good. I just know that for me, what's been wired in me is I'm still wanting to be more intentional and go after things. It's just not accomplishment based in terms of like producing something as much as just wanting to produce a great family. And still do those other things as well. But like what I thought you were going to say, and I wrestled with this, is like some people, it's not even that they will go the direction of like, feel like I've got to do more, accomplish more before I breathe my last breath. Sometimes the idea of death or coming face to face with death of somebody just completely wipes them off, like from doing anything. Like they're just like done. Like they get depressed. They just don't want to go on living. And I didn't address that yesterday because some people can look at death and it's debilitating. It's just like
so much fear.
Yeah. Or like the phenomenon of like when a loved one passes away, especially older, husband and wife, like generally there's a short span of time once one of them dies that the other one doesn't follow suit within a few years. So there is that side of it too, where death can be not invigorating, but debilitating. Yeah. In it. So, because I mean, for you, like even when you were talking about the loss 2 years ago, maybe walk through, like, did you wrestle with which direction you were going to go with that in terms of how you were going to respond?
Me personally, no.
Yeah. Okay.
I think like we have a huge family, so I've dealt with death a lot. I mean, obviously this was the most, I feel like unnatural or like jarring for sure. But the way that our family was raised was always with a very natural idea about death. Like when my grandmother passed, our whole family was around her bed, and it was just part of it. It was just part of life, sort of a thing. And I think because I'm so like I feel rooted and grounded in Jesus that I never had a question to like dive to the other way. Like I know that there's more to come, and I think I lost a cousin when we were both 24. We were the same age. That was a little bit more difficult because I wasn't sure where he was in his relationship to God. And I never, like I shared a lot about my faith at that point with him, but he never really fully embraced that. So I don't really know like that. But Ernie, I did know. I did know that he had a faith. And so that was a little more simplified for me. But yeah, no, I've watched though, like, I had another really close friend that lost her husband around the same time. And, you know, there's a difference in how you deal with death based on where your faith lies. Absolutely. For sure. Yeah. And so, and not just that, I've seen people of faith also crumble, just not being able to wrestle with the loss. But for me, I've always been able to assimilate the fact that death is part of life. Yeah. And allow God to work through it. And I think to your point, about the, you know, pursuing other things, I think like there is a natural shifting and sifting of, you know, your priorities. And just because Brandon's were like, I need to focus more on my family doesn't necessarily mean this person's who needs to like feel like they have something to say. It just is like, for me, it weeded out things that were unimportant, things that I were maybe focusing on that were not important, or things that I was leaving undone that, you know, you just think like, oh, I'll have another day for that, or next year I'll really focus on that. It just brought those things to the surface and let other things pass that were like, this isn't for me. Yeah. Like you said, like I've done what's for me. Like it really makes you think about what is for me. What, Lord, do you have in front of me that is really for me? And it makes you really ask that question in a more serious way. Yeah.
I think one of the things that from yesterday that like there was that focus of how death and the thought of death, the idea of death can be motivating to, you know, key in on what matters most and, you know, live like you're dying, as Tim McGraw said. Anthony said that he's had that song in his head all day and he was so mad.
Never heard it. He was so mad at me. Quoting you, I was like, is this famous? I don't know. When I thought it was country, I'm like, oh, that's why.
Yeah, yeah. But I think when I went through the devotional in August, what struck me most, and I tried to allude to it yesterday, but it wasn't so, there was the, you know, the refocusing of what matters. But a part of me struggles at times with the nature of the commands of Christ that are very, feel like self-defeating. Like that you just got to sacrifice more, suffer more, do more, give more, like be less of you. And I think maybe sometimes because I'm a pastor and I recognize both at our church and even in church world that's not the most fun message to preach. And so sometimes we do that and supplement, but not like consistent. But I know it's there. But like I think that idea from 1 Corinthians 15:31, when that quote from St. Anthony the monk said that processing this idea of I die daily, that it's not this like I mentioned yesterday, that declaration of limitation as much as it is an invitation to like abundance. Like I just had not come to that place where I looked through that lens. Like if Paul did say, I face death every day or I die daily. And a part of that was him wanting to come to terms with just the limited amount of time he might have, which would actually push him to live more. That just feels so different to me than pick up your cross, die to yourself, all that kind of stuff. Like it's like,
Yeah, that is definitely a different way of thinking. I'd never thought about it like that.
and I just remember that day just being like, because how do you hold in both hands sometimes this promise that Jesus came to give life and life to the fullest, or that he wipes your sins away, that he loves you, that he cherishes you, that he holds you in the palms of his hand, and all these types of things that are really warm and fuzzy, and at the same time he's like, now pick up your death instrument and walk with me, get rid of yourself and you're like, whoa, those just feel so like just opposite of each other. And I know that there's grace and truth and stuff, but it just helped me kind of reconcile some of those things and saying like, it's actually, it does go within his nature of his love and his kindness and his mercy, of him inviting me to have less of me so I can have more of him, which would actually bring more life as he's promised. And there's just different verbiages that can be used to describe that. And so I don't know. I don't even know if I'm articulating that the way it,
No, I get
but
it.
that for me was probably what was most profound going through that devotional of being like, oh, okay. Cause yeah, I struggle. Cause like, what point do you tell people like, come to Jesus, he's gonna make all things great. Anyone should die. And he's sick of you doing that, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, sometimes it just feels like we're disingenuous in our invitation for people to follow Christ.
Yeah.
I think it depends what you are putting, like when you say die to self, it's like, I don't know. And I've wrestled with this myself because especially even talking with friends like Matt Heinrichsey, who have a very strong view of that. And he and I don't quite see eye to eye on it. But like, I think the challenge in when I look at the desert fathers like St. Anthony and others, there was a movement towards like asceticism of literally like punishing myself, suffering, choosing to hurt myself, sometimes literally like, but selling everything, living out in the desert where it's hot and like wearing like clothing that's very itchy just to remind yourself that Jesus suffered.
Yeah.
I think that like, while a lot of great stuff came from those people, I disagree with that. I think Paul disagreed with it. I think when Paul wrote Colossians, he was pushing back against some of that, saying this whole stuff that you got to like hurt yourself or if to find it, you got to like punish your body. He's like, that's what I'm saying. I think like die to self isn't a death of desire or personality. It's not a death of the ego per se. It's the death of the life I'm trying to create for myself. It's the death of self-rule. It's the death of this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do. This is what's going to make me happy. And for Jesus to say, I actually have good life for you, but the life you're trying to create for yourself is getting in the way. And if you don't die to it, if you don't surrender it and choose my way, you're not going to find it. And the upside down nature of Christianity is not that God just wants us to suffer. It's that in some ways that are almost impossible for my mind to get around, sometimes the good life that God has for me, it actually is a path that is harder at the beginning, that sometimes involves suffering or difficulty or pain. And so I don't know. I've wrestled that as well, because like, I don't think that suffering is God's plan for humanity. I think that we're so messed up. We're so far from what God's plan is that to get back, like a doctor, like sometimes has to hurt us a little bit to fix us. And we have to be willing to embrace that in order to find healing. And that's a whole different way of thinking. But I definitely think thinking about our mortality and all this stuff is part of it. I don't know, but different people have different takes on that for sure. So
we are doing Rooted with the high schoolers.
Yeah.
And one of the coolest things was to just really ask them why. Why are you part of this? What made you sign up for this? And a couple of the kids really, their question for why was like, I really want to know, like, if I'm going to give my whole life to this, why? Why should Jesus be trusted? Why should this way be the right way? Like, I believe in Jesus, but like, I want to dive deeper into why? Why am I making these sacrifices? Why am I doing these things? And it made me think about the message that you gave about the good. Like really, when you really seek out and figure out how good God is and the good that he wants for us, it does answer that question as to why would I lay down my life? Why would I put my things aside? Because it is better. Like when you do put the vain living aside and, I'm doing this for me, I'm doing this for myself, I want more for me, and put your selfishness aside and really pursue what Christ has for us, you do figure out that it is a better way for sure. So I'm excited for those kids to dig in because they are figuring it out. And so I'm excited for that. Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah. And I think that it's trying to keep the full narrative intact, right? Because sometimes there are different theological camps and denominations that probably emphasize more the ascetic type of.
I dated a guy like that when I first became a Christian, and it was all about martyr suffering.
Yeah,
I can't have good things. I can't do good things. Like it was just like a lot of like I need to be in this little space because I need to suffer for Christ.
And so much of it becomes in that moment at times. I feel like sin management.
Yes,
and not letting my ego run wild, not letting others. And I think that there is a part of that is really important to have yourself crucified to the desires and to all those things. But if it's not held also in the fullness of what Christ taught and what he does provide, which is good, and there are good gifts that come from your Heavenly Father and things like that, it just helps. It helps kind of give a broader, more full perspective. And I think that I probably was introduced to Christianity more in the side of like, have less, suffer more, grit it through, but it's worth it in the end. And I think that's why I probably over 23 years, I don't fight that, but I'm always like, well, what about these verses too? How do these come together? And in particular, looking at the cross and thinking about like this idea of I've been crucified with Christ or die yourself, and to see that as an invitation of like, this is a good thing. This isn't a self-martyrdom. Like this is me actually wanting to fill you even more with my spirit, which will provide the best for you, versus you just having to work harder to die more and to have less, but ultimately work out in the end. And so, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how to articulate it, but I know that there was just something in me that just is almost like you see that the diamond in a different angle, and the light reflects differently, and you're like, oh, okay. I'm kind of seeing how these all go together, and it doesn't feel so disjointed.
Go ahead.
The quote you gave from, was it Francis of Do Yours? Who was that?
Oh, that was St. Francis. Yeah.
I think there's something powerful there when it comes to suffering, because, and I'm just in opinion now, but when how do I say this? When you know that God has called you to something, and man, I've been there in my life, and like, this is God's plan for me. I am walking in line with what God wants. Persecution, suffering, trials, hardship, enduring those things is like worth it.
Yeah.
Because there's so much fulfillment in doing what God calls you to. So when I read Paul, and that's where a lot of this comes from, right? When I read Paul and he talks about how much he's suffering, and like Philippians is not about suffering. Philippians is about how much joy he's found in life despite suffering, because the reason he's suffering is he's doing this great work that God's called him to, and he's found so much joy in it. And it's like, I know I'm suffering, but man, look at how great this is.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge is when we just take on the suffering and the cross, but not the joy set before Jesus, like that. If I'm just suffering for no reason, I don't know what that is. That's that's just weirdness.
Seems mean.
Yeah. If it's difficult and it's a challenge, and sometimes it's hard to get out of bed in the morning, but I'm going to keep getting out of the morning because God has called me to something. Like that changes the whole dynamic of suffering.
Yeah.
Like it's even like, I don't have enough money right now. Well, do I not have enough money because life sucks, or because, man, I'm on this mission and things just aren't lining up perfectly yet? Those are two very different ways of living. And one just feels like, oh, life is horrible. The other's like, you know what, this is kind of tough right now, but man, it's exciting. And so I tend to read Paul's language through the lens of this guy who was finding real joy and excitement doing what God called him to. And it was saying to us and the other churches, like, man, when you obey Jesus, when you live this life out, there's going to be trials, but like, if you're in his will and you're following him, like, it's going to be worth it. And so keep going. And worth it is like, there's goodness for you in it. And so it's not just suffering for suffering's sake. It's, we're getting somewhere, we're doing something.
Yeah. That's really good.
You talked about that in your message a little bit. Like, you talked about like being in the Lord's will and like really thinking about like, what does he have for us? And I remember growing up, my grandmother, like, we were Portuguese, and every time she would say goodbye to us, she would say in Portuguese, but she would say, I'll see you soon.
Can you say it in Portuguese, please?
Okay. She would say, "Até amanhã, se Deus quiser." And it means like, until tomorrow, if the Lord wills. And she really exemplified a life of like serving others, loving others, doing all of that. But like Pete said, like, if you're in the Lord's will, it makes it all worth it. And and that's why I think the question of the kids so much, like, why would I do all of this? But when you understand why you're laying your stuff down and you're really like walking in the will of God, it does make it worth it. And it does make every day matter all the more.
Yeah. That's a good place to stop. I mean, you spoke Portuguese and dropped the mic at the same time.
All I heard was skadoosh. I thought of Kung Fu Panda.
Skadoosh.
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 Skadoosh. What does that mean?
It's a universal language.
I don't know.
Okay.
Never mind.
It's a kid's cartoon, whatever.
Okay.
Skadoosh.
Well, Jen, thanks for being on Digging Deeper. And we'll see who's going to be next week. And hey, be praying, because hopefully Ben is not behind the camera next week.
Yeah.
That the boys are coming into the world. And if that happens, we actually don't even have a plan, do we? Of Digging Deeper. We may or may not have Digging Deeper next week if the babies are here. So, but if we...
Maybe audio only. There may not be
audio. So we'll see. But we'll close out Walking in Big Sky this Sunday. And then we're just 2 weeks away now from 10-year birthday for Rise City. So that'll be a big day as well. So thanks for hanging with us today, and see you next week.
See you guys.
Bye.